this proves that the only thing that matters to the markets is the QE and those policies and the upside damage that they do. And the reason I say upside damage is because, when you distort reality for a long period of time and you kick the can, when the Band-Aid gets ripped off, so to speak, then you have what we've seen in the streets. This isn't purely a function of what one Minnesota policeman or four Minnesota policemen did to one completely innocent, undeserving black man. That's not what this is about. I mean, some of it for sure, but the fact that you've had people join all over the world and in all kinds of towns where you might not expect that sort of thing, that was the spark or the catalyst to get people to get out and vent their anger and rage. Maybe they can't even articulate why they're so angry. I think locking people down and taking away their sources of income for months on end and not really giving a prospect for how they're going to get back to that and what's going to happen, it creates a tremendous amount of frustration and ill will, and it all spills out. So, by all rights, the market should have gotten clubbed at least for a couple of days on that news, and yet it didn't. And it's because of the learned behavior that all the QE and all the easy money before that. I mean, this has been going on for 12 years of QE, but wrongful, too easy monetary policies now for 25. So you've got a generation or two who's only seen this sort of thing. So anyway, we create markets that are impervious to news, and we get people to speculate, and there's going to be a price to pay. I mean, we're not getting past the election or very far past it without a huge hiccup in the market. I mean, unless they come with an even unfathomable more QE. But at some point, they're going to lose the bond market. I've talked to you about this before. And when they lose the bond market, they're not going to be able to do this anymore. Now, there's the possibility that they could end up doing cold fusion, and that's a different outcome. But in any case, the end game is the Fed will keep doing this, and they'll keep monetizing stuff until something stops them. I assume it will be the bond market. I doubt it will be the currency because the other central banks are doing the same thing. So how can you really care whether you own a yen or a euro or a dollar when it's all crap to begin with?
Yeah, and that's what I talked to with Schiff on my last appearance with him, which is, if everybody's kind of complicit in this global prisoner's dilemma of central banking the way that we're doing it, doesn't that prolong it for a while? But I want to go back to just unpack one or two things that you said, and I was hoping that you might be able to do something for my listeners. Can you just basically explain, when we say that the Fed widens the inequality gap instead of shrinks it, can you explain from a very bird's eye view how that happens to somebody that might not understand it?
Sure. Let's say you are a person that makes, I don't know what salary level's appropriate to pick, because different cities and different regions require a different amount of salary. But let's say you're a married couple, maybe you have a child or maybe two or maybe none, and the level of income between you and your wife or you by yourself just barely allows you to live sort of comfortably, not as well as you might like, but you can maybe you can go out to eat, whether it might only be a high-end chain restaurant as opposed to a fancy place, but you feel semi-comfortable, and you feel like, if I keep working hard, maybe there's some way for me to kind of get ahead. I can make more money and then start to save some, maybe invest some. So that's a certain strata. That's what we kind of used to call the middle class, and there's varying degrees of that. You can make more and actually be saving money and have a little money in the market. You can't put it in bonds anymore because there's no interest anywhere. But let's say that that's the kind of person you were, but in the last decade, all of a sudden, your money doesn't go as far. You don't have as much excess income, and that's because the cost of things have gone up. Now you wouldn't see it in the CPI data because, as I've explained before, the CPI data is uniquely constructed such that price increases get smothered. There's hedonics, and there's substitution, and there's owner equivalent rent. Anyway, there's a bunch of things that make the costs that you see at home not show up as inflation. So you might think you're crazy that there's not supposed to be an inflation, but yet your paycheck isn't going so far. So you're kind of falling behind the the level of income in life that you expected to have as you proceed through your career. And you get frustrated by that, and especially when you see signs of opulence and some people with so much money and doing so many crazy things and all this wealth, and it builds a certain frustration level. You've been sort of eviscerated by the Fed policies. You haven't been helped. The things where the money is leaked out, besides just going into financial assets and things rich people buy, it's pushed up the price of education and healthcare and other service type things. Maybe bread hasn't gone up until recently. So you've been kind of left behind. Meanwhile, if you were lucky enough to get to that position in life and get ahead in your job and start saving money before we got to this policy, or where you got a job where you got some stock options and you got some capital, well, all of a sudden the capital that you had that you were able to put aside has started to really grow, and all of a sudden now you got a lot of extra money, and you've got some wealth. And depending on how much you have and how lucky you were and how well you did, you may have 50,000 in the bank, 500,000, 5 million, 50 million, or then you can get up into really big numbers. And so the people that had the ability to put capital aside because of their job or their station in life or inheritance or stock options, or they're the greatest athlete in some sport, they got capital, and that capital has grown. The policy of the Federal Reserve has grown the capital, not exponentially, but in a very non-linear way.
Right.
Whereas if you haven't had that capital, you haven't been able to get to the point where you can attain it. So the policies keep you behind, and the other guys get to keep getting ahead. And at some point, maybe you can sense that if you can't see it and articulate it. And so that's how it goes, and that's how the inequality continues to get worse.
And the Fed doesn't seem to have a clue that this is part of what made, with the addition of the pandemic, but is part of probably historically what they've done over the last 10, 15 years, 20 years, part of what has created the powder keg that has led to the unrest that we're seeing, is what you're saying.
Well, I would say my belief, and of course I've got this philosophy and belief and data sets about what the Fed's done and how it's warped things, and so I believe this very strongly. So I'm inclined to maybe blame too much. Some people might say you blame too much on the Fed. Well, I don't think so, but I understand that criticism. I believe what I described to you, is part of the frustration that brought in Trump. It wasn't that net people said, oh, we hate Obama so much and we hate Hillary so much. Some did, obviously. But it was like, okay, we got to try something else. And it was him. So I think that the part of what I've discussed is part of what brought Trump in. And so that was the first kind of sign that something wasn't right. And then we saw Brexit, so that was maybe the same sort of thing going on over there. They were frustrated, and this was their chance to lash out. Then on top of that, you've had the last few years where there's been more of the same. And then you tell people you can't go to work. We don't know when you're going to be able to go to work. And if you can think about it, you probably realize that your work's not going to come back the way it was. And then all of a sudden you don't have any money, and you're going to lose your business, or you're worried about losing your house. The mental stress of having to worry every single day about what am I going to do financially? How am I going to get out of this? I don't care if the government gives you some free money. If you were a dishwasher at a restaurant, perhaps now the things they've done has helped you. So there's a certain strata, certain level of income where they've kind of supported you. But other than that, there's a lot of people walking around, they don't have any idea how they're going to get back to where they were. And for some, it's not going to be able to happen. And this is the number one thing that I've fretted about and felt so much sort of empathy for people for, is it would be so difficult to have to think about that every single day.
Right.
And
yep.
know. So not only are you trapped and you can't do anything, you've been stewing in the juices of knowing, God, I'm on my way to financial ruin and I didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And why won't they let me try to go to work? Why can't we try to do something? We started out to smother the spike, and I will give you full credit. You were on that like a dog on a bone in the very beginning about how dangerous this flu was. I myself was on it early, but not as early as, I would say your hair was on fire, but you had hair crop down so low, I don't think it could have caught fire. And so there was a time to run around and say, folks, we got to stop this. You did what you did. I did what I did in my columns. And unfortunately, nobody paid attention. And then when it hit, they overreacted. And they overreacted and they shut everything down because they had to smother the spike. I get that. But then they overdid it. The politicians don't care. I don't care what they say. And I'm sure there are some exceptions to this rule, but largely not. They don't care if they bankrupt a whole bunch of people, millions and millions of businesses. They don't really care. It doesn't hurt them. But they'll feel criticized if the incremental death happens. Or they made the COVID a cause celeb. So now they're overreacting in the other way, and they're doing far more damage. This country, people would have died, and people will get upset for me for saying this, but we would have had more deaths had they done a lot less of this. But the country as a whole would be better off. There's a huge multiplier of how many people have been economically displaced versus how many have died. And there's no real incentive on the part of a lot of these politicians to undo that. And as you can see, what's happened is now they get power and they can tell any business they want, you can open for 15 minutes, you can have this, you can only open so much. So you have people that don't really know anything about business, they're in politics, and they're making business decisions across the board for people. And so that's a very scary prospect. How are you going to get a chance to get back to any kind of a life to feed your family, to make money, to try to get ahead, to save your daughter, go to college? I mean, I could make up a million different scenarios. So that is the situation that this murder occurred in, and people blew up.